Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, our weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, it's a quick trip around the globe. We're starting in China. The holidays are over, but where are the workers of the People's Republic? Is the so-called factory of the world running out of steam? Then it's to Europe, with trouble still lingering in the Eurozone. How about a helping hand? IMF style. And in Iran, the budget's out. Ahmadinejad is axing food and energy subsidies. How will it all play out with the people? Hi everyone. First stop China this week, as we say, undoubtedly the economic story of the decade. And with growth of almost 11% last year, there is no question of it taking over Japan as the world's second largest economy at some stage. But look closer, as we are this week, and you'll see the cracks, the fears that the government's stimulus spending and bank lending has in fact overheated the economy, creating the dreaded economic bubble. Will it burst? Well, Premier Wen Jiabao is pledging to curb all the speculation in the housing market at least. But on the job front, many workers haven't actually come back to work following the Lunar New Year. Have a look at this from Rob McBride from a place known as the factory to the world.
In the southern Chinese city of Dongguan, the recruitment stalls idly waiting for new workers who never arrive tell the same story. For this manufacturing powerhouse, the unthinkable is happening. China is running out of people. At least those younger people from poorer provinces willing to work on production lines for a couple of $100s a month. At the factory owned by Tan Li Si, more than half his machines are sitting idle. And if he hadn't offered his workers a 25% pay increase before they left for Chinese New Year, he says, even these people would not have come back.
Right now, I've got 150 machines, and all of them could be working. I have got some friends who have no workers coming back at all.
Learning to operate a machine for the first time, 17-year-old Hu is something of an exception in a one-child generation that is coming to dominate the workforce.
Most of the family in China have only one child, meaning that when they have income, they will spend quite a lot on the single child. They may choose not to work in factories and so on.
Combine that with the creation of higher-paying jobs inland and government measures to keep workers on farms, and China's industrialized coast is struggling to cope with the economic upturn. Across the industrial heartland of China, it's a similar story from one factory to the next. A year ago, enterprises that had been competing with each other for work to stay alive, now competing with each other for workers. At the depths of recession 18 months ago, this factory went bust, laying off 1,000 workers. Then it was making paper products. Today it's preparing to reopen, turning out luggage and trying to recruit hundreds from a workforce that can afford to be choosy.
If a worker finds somewhere that pays better, they will wait until the end of the month to get their salary and they just leave. You can't control them.
Lunchtime conversation among the factory managers is dominated by such talk, with a feeling the whole country is at a crossroads.
The wage is going to go up for sure in China, and the age of cheap labor is coming to an end. And the factories, the employers, the manufacturers have to look for alternative.
In this time of change, here in this corner of communist China, the people getting a taste of that workers' paradise.
So in the end, should China, the mega economy, be truly worried? Well, Taimur Nabili spoke to financial advisor and fund manager Mark Faber, a man with a pretty good track record where China is concerned. Started by asking him about this possible bubble in China's property market.
Bubble is characterized by a credit bubble. In other words, a period during which credit expands at a much faster pace than GDP. And in that sense, we have a credit bubble in China, and the money flowed mostly into properties and equities to some extent. Last year, total credit expanded at almost 25% of GDP, and in January alone of this year, total credit expanded by over $200 billion, which is close to 50% of GDP. So yes, we have a credit bubble. If we, however, refer to prices, I don't think that by and large, with a few exceptions like Hong Kong luxury residential or Shanghai luxury residential, but by and large, property prices in China are reasonable compared to the rest of the world.
Wen Jiabao painted a fairly positive picture about the state of the economy in general and how the future is looking for them. Was he right to be so optimistic?
Well, I'm slightly less optimistic because I think that credit growth will slow down or has to slow down. So either the Chinese economy will slow down sometimes this year or early next year, or it will crash, as some observers say. We don't know that for sure. But I would position myself for a slowdown in economic growth.
Can it actually sustain its economy, though, through a slowdown? I mean, China needs to put in a certain degree of economic growth, doesn't it? And some people are saying that any slowdown will expose what are some fundamentally dangerous imbalances in the economy.
Well, I mean, many people refer to imbalances in the economy. To some extent, that may be true, because in an economic system, when you have rapid growth, you will always have some excess capacities developing in the one or the other sector. But I'd just like to mention, in America, between 1800 and, say, 1900, we had many bubbles like the railroad boom, the canal boom, and all these bubbles eventually came to an end and were painful for 1 or 2 years, and then the economy continued to grow, and therefore there was no long-lasting impact of these bubble bursting. And the same is probably the case in China, where we may have a bubble bursting, say, in properties, maybe in the one or the other city, and then we'll have high vacancies, a slowdown in economic growth, and 4 or 5 years later, the economy will continue to expand.
And now from China to Greece, which, like China, features heavily here on Counting the Cost. And why wouldn't it? There is a huge cost to be counted in Greece right now, and plenty of other European nations which are falling on hard times. But where do they turn? There's the International Monetary Fund, well, perhaps, but Eurozone nations are reluctant to head there and in turn risk damaging the EU's credibility. So what about an EMF, a European Monetary Fund? Some say it's high time. Nazni Mashiri in Frankfurt has more.
This is where you'll find the strongest voices calling for a European monetary fund. Economists here in Frankfurt will argue the difficulties facing Greece, Spain and Portugal highlight not only the weaknesses of their government, but also the fact there is no Eurozone institution here to help them. Thomas Mayer is one of the most important economists in Europe and one of the first people to float the idea of an EMF. Why do European nations need a European monetary fund when we already have an international monetary fund?
I think we found out over the last 2 years or so that something is missing in European Monetary Union, and that is a crisis management instrument that is designed specifically for the needs of the euro area countries. Of course, the IMF can do a lot, and the IMF has been active in Central Europe, but what the IMF cannot do in the end is to allow for the very unlikely but possible event of a sovereign bankruptcy. I think we need to have a mechanism to allow a country to default within EMU in an orderly way so that it does not bring down other countries, that it does not bring down the entire European Monetary Union. If you want, we need something like the Americans have in the private sector, which they call Chapter 11.
Although German Chancellor Angela Merkel has shown some support for the proposal, she's also warned the EU's treaty would have to be changed, and that could rule out solving the current crisis. After all, arguments over the Lisbon Treaty went on for 8 years. There's no shortage of other issues to consider. For example, who would pay and how much?
We must think ahead, and I'm saying that the possibilities of sanctions must be tightened, and as a last resort, the creation of a European Monetary Fund is an absolutely good idea, which of course needs to be discussed in detail.
A European Monetary Fund could help the next Greece, but the question over how to resolve the current Greek crisis still remains, putting the financial markets and the euro under serious pressure.
When Counting the Cost returns, we're all about Iraq and Iran, the former on the edge of change, but will its economy follow suit? And the latter facing another decline in food and energy subsidies. We'll speak to the country's interior minister about where it might lead in just a moment. Welcome back to Counting the Cost, your weekly business stop here on Al Jazeera. We turn to Iraq now, fresh from its elections and with the population hoping whoever takes the reins of the country can create some jobs and prosperity too. Of course, it is tough and the economy is probably not going to improve until security does, but Iraq has such untapped potential and most of it can be unlocked by one thing: oil. Represents more than 70% of GDP, but check out this comparison. Before the 2003 war, Iraq was producing every day around 2.6 million barrels of oil. In February of this year, that rate had slowed to less than 2.5 million a day. Or to tell it another way, the IMF says Iraq's economy grew 9.5% in 2008, but as the oil prices went down, that growth halved in 2009. Now, for the economy to reverse that trend, it needs foreign investment, which is trickling in. UAE property developer Al Mabar signed a $10 billion deal to build houses, hotels, healthcare facilities. General Electric and Siemens have a $4.7 billion deal to provide gas turbines. And automakers Daimler and the truck maker Scania plan to assemble vehicles in the country too, so it is happening. Will any of it make a difference though? Sam Chalabi might be able to tell us. He was the country's oil minister before the first Gulf War in the early 90s, now based in Amman. Mr. Chalabi, thank you for your time. Oil is Iraq's economic backbone. There is talk of trying to get up to 12 million barrels a day in 6 or 7 years, which all sounds great, but is there any point trying when security is still such a concern?
No, I mean, they shouldn't have waited for that long to reach a higher figure than what they are producing now. The actual production before the 2003 war was much more than what it is now. I mean, Iraq was producing almost 3 million barrels a day, exporting 2.5 million barrels a day. And up till now, they have not been able to reach those figures. 7 years with all the support that they were getting from all the international companies from all over the world, yet because of corruption, because of bad management, they have not been able to reach more than 2.5 million barrels a day of production. They talk about increasing the production as a result of the contract that they have signed up to 12 million barrels a day. Well, I hope that you and I will be alive and you can see that there will not be such a figure. Iraq cannot reach that figure, and even if a production will go up to 7-8 million barrels a day, then definitely Iraq will not be able to export those figures. So what's the use of having that much spare production capacity when you cannot use it?
But eventually there's got to be, and you're painting unfortunately a very pessimistic picture here, but eventually there's got to be a point where Iraq can realise that wealth and actually put it to use for the Iraqi people themselves.
Well, again, as I said, I mean, Iraq has received almost $200 billion of oil revenue throughout the past few years. What did they do with that? Do we have proper electricity? Do we have proper water? Do we have proper infrastructure? And the same people who are running the country will be doing the same, most likely, during the next 4 years. So unless we see a proper transformation of politics in Iraq, that means we see proper reconciliation among the various groups, and we see that we do away completely with sectarian policies, and we have to do something about corruption. Iraq is rated throughout the past few years among the first 3 countries in the world. This has never happened before, and we are talking about tens of billions of dollars that have been missing. So what do we do with that? Have they ever held anybody accountable? Have they ever taken any personalities to court? Some of them have been accused by squandering billions of dollars. Okay, what happened to those people? They have either left the country or they are still working in the country. And this is not me saying it, but this is a result of the reports that are being said and prepared by the Pentagon, by the Foreign Affairs State of in the United States, the Congress, all various organizations, the United Nations, yet nothing has happened. So you are asking me to be optimistic while I need something tangible in my hands. I wish I could, because the people have suffered a lot. And yet, you know, I hope that I am mistaken. I hope that these people will change their policies and try to utilize the money that they have received and they will be receiving for the benefit of the people. First of all, let them provide these people with water, electricity. These are the simple needs of human beings.
You put a lot of emphasis, and fair enough too, on government and officials and corruption. I wonder too about the international companies which you talk about as well, the responsibility, if you like, that they have to come in and invest in the country, not just exploit the oil fields, make money for themselves and leave again.
Do you think they are there to help the Iraqi people? No way. Those companies, and I wouldn't blame them for adopting such policy, they are going into Iraq just like they have been into any other country for their own benefit. They are there to book some reserves, barrels of oil in their books. They are there to make profits. They are there to trade with more quantities of oil. They are not there to help the Iraqis. You tell me why they should do that. So definitely they have gone there, or they are going there for their own benefits.
So they're as bad as the politicians, you're saying?
Or maybe even worse sometimes, because if you want to discuss the oil politics, if you want to discuss the policy that is going to be adopted in terms of production, then I can tell you a lot, because these figures, you mentioned one of them as being 12 million barrels a day, these cannot be achieved. This is not to the advantage of the oil reserves of the country, because no way that you can increase the production from each of those fields to such sky-high figures, because that will be at the detriment of these fields and these reserves. Then you might be doing that for a couple of years, 3 years, and then the decline will be so steep. Then we will be losing lots of oil to the ground. And everybody is talking about this. Everybody is saying, including some senior members of the Iraqi government who are well conversant with the oil technology in Iraq, and they say that they will not be able to reach more than 6 or 6.5 million barrels a day. And that might be reasonable, because it might also they might also be able to export that much. So they have to be very careful, because this oil is not for the current generation, it's for future generations. And it is not only for Iraq, it is for the whole world. Everybody must be very careful in how to deal with these fields and with these reservoirs.
Final question for you, sir, and it's actually nothing to do with oil, in the sense that, well, what we've talked about in the last few minutes shows how troubling and divisive oil can be. With that in mind, where else could Iraq make its money? How could it diversify its economy? And I know we're talking long term here, but diversify its economy beyond oil?
Well, this is something that have been talked about for the last few decades. Everybody was talking, why should Iraq be depending only on oil, and why shouldn't Iraq depend on other industries, on its agriculture, on other possibilities. But unfortunately, Iraq failed, and everybody was working on the oil and tried to increase the revenue from oil. And I think this is what's going to happen. Iraq has potentials. They have to improve on the situation of the land. They have to improve on the irrigation system. Iraq now is importing everything from outside. Believe me, all its vegetable, all its fruit, everything. It's being imported from outside. So what they need to, they have to look into their irrigation systems. They have to look into their land, improve that, and then also to try to provide proper education, proper health system for the people. Then when you have the resources, the human resources, you have a proper environment, I think then you can do that. So oil will remain beneath the ground, as nobody's going to take it away. So I think we better minimize, or let's say be just satisfied with a certain figure of revenue, know how to utilize it properly, and not to have 80% of the budget now that is being allocated, it's consumables. 20% supposedly to be for capital investment. And what do we have with that? Have we built major power stations? Have we built hospitals? Have we built similar infrastructure needs? No way. So I think we have to change our attitude, our policies, then maybe Iraq will have a future.
Issam Chalabi, former Iraqi oil minister, joining us from Amman. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And from Iraq to Iran, the world's fifth largest oil exporter, so another big player, but again, not without its problems. Now, we know all about Iran's political isolation, the sanctions over its nuclear program. Is its economy suffering? Well, apparently not, if you ask Iran's politicians at least. That's after President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad announced in his latest budget that food and energy subsidies would continue to be cut back. Some lawmakers say inflation could soar back to 30% and lead to more of the petrol riots we saw in 2007. Others, though, say it's actually what the people want. One of them is Mustafa Mohammad Najjar, Iran's interior minister, who I spoke to here in Doha.
We have no worries or concerns. We have done all the necessary predictions and looked at the possible outcomes. Given that this is the general public's desire and this policy has been made according to their wishes, there are no worries, and if anything, we think this is the only way to improve the economic situation and make things better for the people. The parliament's duty is to carry out people's wishes.
Is Iran looking outside its oil, basically? Oil is where the money comes from at the moment. Is it looking to diversify its economy from that?
We are already looking into a variety of new economic areas and policies. We have already developed and advanced in many different sectors, including new technologies such as, for example, for space, for peaceful nuclear energy, as well as in education, health and medical research. Thankfully, our country is progressing well. Of course, we are an oil-rich country and we have plentiful resources, but we are trying to develop infrastructure so that in the future, we won't need to be so dependent on oil, and instead be dependent on other sectors such as science and other domestic productions.
So you're happy Iran's economy is in good shape, you're saying?
Unlike countries in Europe and the United States who are in an economic crisis, we thankfully don't have that. We have economic growth and are in good shape.
Check out Counting the Cost online when you get the chance. You'll get it from the programs link at aljazeera.net/English. The weekly blog's up there with details of some new developments online to keep an eye out for, plus previous editions of the show to catch up on. It's all as ever at aljazeera.net/English. That's it from Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.